Hello, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs. Give me a couple of minutes and I'll tell you all about Sony's latest full-frame mirrorless camera, the A7R Mark II. Here it is, the A7R Mark II. By name, obviously, it's the successor to the original A7R, and it bumps the resolution up from 36 to 42 megapixels. But in many respects, this camera, Sony's fifth full-frame mirrorless, is a kind of combination of the three existing product lines. By using a new back-illuminated CMOS sensor, it can offer very high sensitivity, so in that respect, it could be seen as almost a successor to the A7S. And with decent autofocus and continuous shooting performance, maybe it's also an A7 successor. Now, this camera does inherit much of the body design and built-in stabilization of the A7 Mark II. But there's a couple of really interesting things about it that I want to talk about briefly in this video. First of all, anybody who is familiar with the original A7R will know that it had quite a clunky shutter and it did suffer from some vibration issues. Sony's resolved that. Let's have a listen to the new shutter sound. That is much quieter than before. It uses an electronic first curtain shutter, and if I switch it to continuous shooting, this camera is shooting 42 megapixel images at 5 frames per second, and that is also supporting continuous autofocus, so that is actually quite high performance for a camera of this resolution. And that neatly takes me on to autofocus, because this camera also has the highest number of embedded phase detect AF points of any mirrorless camera, no fewer than 399 of them, covering almost 45% of the frame. Now, what makes this particularly exciting is how well it works with older lenses for me. While Sony is increasing the number of native FE mount lenses, I was very curious to see how this camera would perform with older A mount lenses and even adapted lenses, for example, from Canon. Well, I can tell you that I have tried this camera, the A7R Mark II, with a variety of A mount lenses using the older, or rather simpler, LA-EA3 adapter. Now, that's just basically a hole in the middle of a lens extension tube. So there's none of the SLT mirror technology in there. And I found that the autofocusing speed was actually pretty respectable. It wasn't quite as quick as using the more sophisticated LA-EA4 adapter, but remember that that adapter only had 15 AF points covering a smaller frame. This camera will use all 399 of its phase detect AF points over a larger frame, and it will support face detection as well. So in some respects it's actually performing better, but I wanted to take it further, so I removed the lens and tried it with the Metabones adapter with a variety of Canon lenses. Now here I have the EF 24mm USM lens. Now this isn't a particularly demanding lens, but it's one that I had to hand. And if I just try the camera here, you can hear it. Hopefully hear that double beep confirmation sound. It's actually refocusing very, very quickly. In fact, I found with this lens and this adapter, the A7R Mark II was focusing pretty much at the same speed as it would with an A-mount lens via the LA-EA3 adapter. And that's pretty amazing to be able to do that with Canon lenses. Now, of course, there are some caveats. It won't work with all Canon lenses. The older ones may not autofocus at all, but it certainly worked with this one, and it worked very well. And I should also add, it worked with continuous autofocus. So think about that again. Fast and confident, phase detect based continuous autofocus with Canon lenses via an adapter. I mean, even on some Canon bodies, the live view performance isn't that spectacular. So this makes the A7R Mark II a very, very tempting camera. Just going over those initial specifications again: 42 megapixel resolution, 399 embedded phase detect AF points, 5 frames per second continuous shooting, and of course 4K video that can be recorded internally. Just one note about that 4K video: there's actually two coverage options. One uses the full frame coverage and one uses a cropped Super 35 coverage. Now, the interesting thing about that one, Super 35 is a 1.5 times field reduction, so it's like shooting APS-C. Now, unfortunately, the number of pixels that you've got left there don't divide evenly into a 4K resolution. Sony has had to reduce them by 1.8 times. However, it was at great pains to point out that it reckoned it did it very, very well, and that there was no moire or any scaling artifacts to worry about. Personally speaking, I'm not a filmmaker, so I'm not that bothered about having precise Super 35 coverage. I'd sooner have slightly broader coverage with an exact 2 times reduction for smoother scaling, but the proof, as they say, of the pudding is in the eating. So we'll have to wait and see what footage from final production samples looks like. This is a pre-production model, so unfortunately I cannot share any images or video from it, but I did want to mention to you sooner rather than later what that autofocusing performance was like, especially with adapted A-mount lenses and Canon EF via the Metabones adapter, and the short answer is very, very good. So this looks like a really exciting camera. I can't wait to test a final production sample. As always, if you want to see my latest results and sample images as I do begin to test one of these, check out my full report at cameralabs.com. I hope you enjoyed that, and as always, let me know what you think of this camera in the comments. Quick PS, you thought I'd forgotten, this has one of the largest electronic viewfinder magnifications around, 0.78 times, makes it fractionally bigger than that on the Fujifilm X-T1, and it does indeed look fabulous when you're composing with the electronic viewfinder. And once again, it does have the built-in 5-axis stabilization of the A7 II, and that works with any lens you attach. So, all in all, a pretty impressive camera. I've just remembered one other thing about it. I can't wait to tell you more. It'll do 720p at 120 frames per second for a 4 times slowdown on a 30p timeline. So, all in all, an extremely impressive model. Sony's raised the bar from what we can expect from a mirrorless camera, and even though it still doesn't have a touch screen, it has pretty much everything else.